When was the last time someone truly listened to you? Not just heard the sounds coming out of your mouth, but actually listened, understood you, felt the weight of what you were saying and held it carefully, the way you'd hold something fragile and precious. And now let me flip that question around. When was the last time you did that for someone else? Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people over 40 have never been told honestly and directly. The quality of your entire life, your relationships, your career, your influence, the way your children and your grandchildren will one day remember you, is determined almost entirely by one skill. Not your intelligence, not your formal education, not even your work ethic, as important as that is. It is how well you communicate. And the reason most people never truly master it isn't because they lack the ability. It is because nobody ever sat them down and told them the truth about what communication really is at its deepest level, and what it quietly costs you every single day when you get it wrong. That is what we are going to do together today. Right now. In the next several minutes, I'm going to give you a philosophy about communication. Not a technique, not a trick, not a checklist, a philosophy. One that, if you truly absorb it and begin living by it, will change the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you carry yourself in conversation, and ultimately the way people respond to you for the rest of your life. Stay with me. This matters more than you might realize right now. Now, if you are somewhere between 40 and 65 years old, I want you to think about something genuinely important. You have spent decades communicating. You have had thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of conversations. With your spouse or partner, with your children, your boss, your colleagues, your closest friends. Conversation after conversation after conversation. And somewhere along the way, you probably started to notice a pattern. Maybe certain kinds of conversations keep going wrong in the same predictable way, no matter how carefully you think you're approaching them. Maybe people misunderstand you more than they reasonably should. Maybe you walk away from important discussions feeling unheard, frustrated, or strangely hollow, like the conversation happened around you rather than with you. Maybe you have said exactly the right words and still somehow got entirely the wrong result. If any of that resonates, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. Not even close. And here is what is critically important to understand. It is not because you are a bad communicator. It is because most of us were never taught the deeper mechanics of human communication. We were taught grammar in school. Some of us took a public speaking class. A few of us read a book about body language or negotiation tactics. But nobody ever taught us the philosophy behind why words work, and more importantly, why they so often fail even when we think we're doing everything right. Here's something most people realize far too late in life. By the time you are in your 40s, you have already developed deeply ingrained communication habits. Patterns that feel so natural, so automatic, so much like simply who you are, that you barely notice them anymore. Some of those habits are genuinely serving you. But some of them, and this is the honest, tough love part of this conversation, are quietly costing you relationships, opportunities, and real influence every single day. Think honestly about it. How many times have you said something you regretted the very moment it left your mouth? How many arguments could have been resolved in 5 minutes if you had approached them even slightly differently? How many times have you failed to say what you truly meant, the real thing underneath the words, and paid a real price for that silence? Communication is not just about talking. It never was. At its deepest level, it is about connection. And when that connection breaks down, even subtly, even partially, the cost is far larger than most of us want to admit. But here is the thing that gives me genuine hope for you. The fact that you are here, listening to this, willing to examine these questions, that is not a small thing. That is the beginning of everything. Jim Rohn, one of the great philosophical teachers of personal development in the last century, said something that has stayed with me and grown in meaning every year since I first encountered it. He said, "The major key to your better future is you." At first glance, that sounds almost too simple, almost obvious. But sit with it for a moment, because what he was really pointing to goes much deeper than it appears. What he was saying is this: everything in your life, your results, your relationships, your income, your happiness, the texture of your daily experience, is ultimately a reflection of your philosophy. The way you think about things determines the way you act. And the way you act, repeated across days and weeks and years, determines everything you experience. And nowhere in human life is this principle more visibly, more immediately, more powerfully true than in the domain of communication. Most people approach communication as a technique, as something you do with your mouth, as a skill you practice in front of a mirror, or a set of phrases you memorize for difficult conversations. And while technique has its place, we'll get into specific principles later, the real breakthrough never comes from technique alone. It comes from philosophy. The great communicators, the people who seem to effortlessly build deep trust, who inspire others without trying hard, who navigate conflict without leaving casualties, who make everyone around them feel genuinely understood, they operate from a fundamentally different set of beliefs about what communication is for. They understand something that took most of them years to fully grasp. Communication is not about being clever. It is not about being articulate in the conventional sense. It is not about confidence, though real confidence certainly helps. The deepest, most important truth about human communication is this: people don't respond to your words. They respond to your intention. And this is where life quietly tests you. Because most of us have intentions we are not fully aware of. We tell ourselves we want to connect, but if we're honest, we're often trying to win. We tell ourselves we want to understand, but we're really waiting for our turn to talk. We tell ourselves we want to be honest, but underneath, we're actually trying to protect our own image, our own ego, our own sense of being right. When you genuinely change your philosophy about communication, when you make a real, committed shift from performing to connecting, from impressing to understanding, from winning to building, something remarkable begins to happen around you. People change in how they respond to you. Conversations become lighter and more productive. Relationships deepen in ways you haven't experienced in years. Your words begin to carry a weight and a credibility that no technique could ever manufacture. Not because you've learned a new trick, but because the fundamental energy behind your words has changed. And people feel that every time. Let me tell you about two men I will call Robert and Daniel. Both of them were regional sales managers at the same mid-sized company. Same territory, similar level of experience, almost identical formal training. On paper, they were as evenly matched as two professionals could be. Robert was a talker, and I mean that in the most vivid sense possible. The man could fill a room with his voice and his presence. When he walked into a meeting, people noticed. He had a loud, confident voice, an easy command of language, and he always had an answer ready before anyone else had finished their question. His presentations were polished. His vocabulary was impressive. His handshake was firm and his eye contact was practiced. On every external measure, he seemed like exactly the kind of communicator who should be rising to the top. Daniel was quieter. He didn't dominate conversations or command rooms. He asked a lot of questions, genuine questions, not rhetorical ones. Sometimes he would pause for what felt like an uncomfortably long time before responding to something, as if he were actually processing what had been said rather than just waiting for his cue to speak. In meetings, he had a habit of saying things like, "Let me make sure I'm really understanding what you're saying here," before he offered his perspective. To some people, that seemed slow. It wasn't. Here is the part one want you to sit with. Guess who built the more successful long-term career? Guess who had the more enduring professional relationships, the deeper trust from his team, the better results over time? Guess who had the stronger marriage? Guess whose adult children called him regularly, not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to? It was Daniel. Every single time, across every dimension that actually matters. And the reason wasn't mysterious, though it took years for the people around him to fully articulate it. Daniel had understood something that Robert, despite all his natural talent and surface-level polish, never quite figured out. Daniel understood that the purpose of communication is not to impress. It is to understand and to be understood. Robert was always, on some level, performing. In every conversation, no matter how casual, some part of him was trying to demonstrate something. His intelligence, his authority, his competence, his wit. And people sensed it. Not consciously, perhaps, but they sensed it the way you sense when a room is slightly too cold. They respected him at a professional distance. But they didn't trust him deeply. They didn't confide in him. They didn't follow him with genuine loyalty or bring him their real problems. Daniel was always connecting. When Daniel gave you his attention, you felt, genuinely felt, like you were the only person in the room. You felt heard. You felt respected. You felt like your thoughts and concerns actually mattered to him personally, not just as data points in a conversation. And as a result, you trusted him. Not because he was more charismatic or more articulate, but because he made you feel understood. Here is the truth that I want you to carry with you from this story. In any conversation at all, the person who listens most is almost always the most powerful person in the room. Not the loudest, not the most articulate, the most genuinely attentive. Think about that. Really sit with it. The most powerful person in the room is the one who listens most. That changes everything about how you approach every conversation you'll have from this day forward. Let me give you the first and perhaps the single most transformative principle of communication philosophy I know. Absorb this one deeply, because understanding it will change the way you handle every conflict, personal and professional, for the rest of your life. Most arguments are not about what they're about. Read that again. Most arguments are not about what they appear to be about on the surface. When your partner gets genuinely upset because you forgot to make a phone call, that is almost never actually about the phone call. When your adult child seems resentful about something that seems small and almost arbitrary, that is rarely about the small thing. When a colleague pushes back hard on your idea in a meeting, sometimes aggressively, that is often not really about your idea at all. Beneath almost every surface-level conflict is an unspoken emotional need that isn't being met. A need to feel valued. A need to feel heard and seen. A need to feel respected and treated with dignity. A need to feel secure in the relationship. A need to feel that they matter. And until you address that underlying need, not the surface argument, but the real emotional need beneath it, you can argue about the presenting issue for days and never actually resolve anything. Because you're fighting about the wrong thing. The practical meaning of this for your life is profound. Before you respond to any conflict, before you defend yourself or begin building your case or preparing your counterargument, get genuinely curious. Ask yourself quietly, what is really happening here? What does this person actually need from me right now? Not what are they saying, what do they need? Because the moment you shift from defending yourself to trying to understand the other person's emotional experience, the entire energy of the conversation shifts with you. Often immediately. And here is the deeper reflection I want to offer you. You have probably had the same fundamental argument in your life, with different people, in different circumstances, more times than you can comfortably count. The same themes, the same emotional crescendos, the same feeling of going in circles. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And patterns, when you examine them with genuine honesty, always have something important to teach you about yourself. The second principle is one that most great communicators will tell you took them decades to truly internalize, and it is this: silence is a tool, not a weakness. In fact, in the right hands, silence is one of the most powerful communication tools available to any human being. We live in a culture that equates talking with confidence and silence with uncertainty or defeat. We feel uncomfortable with pauses in conversation. We feel an almost physical urgency to fill them. So we over-explain. We keep talking well past the point where we should have stopped, diluting our message and sometimes actively undermining our own position. We add qualifications and hedges and extra sentences that weaken everything we've said before them. But here is what silence actually does. It creates space. And space is where the most important things happen in any conversation. It is where the other person processes what you've just said, rather than immediately preparing their response. It is where they reveal what they are truly thinking, often filling the silence with something far more honest than what they would have said if you jumped back in. It is where trust quietly builds, because silence communicates that you are not afraid of the moment, that you are not scrambling for approval, that you have enough inner security to let the air settle and simply be present. Think of the people in your life, the ones you genuinely trust most, the ones whose advice you actually seek out and take seriously. I would be willing to bet that most of them were not the loudest voices in every room. They were the ones who spoke deliberately and carefully, who seemed to weigh their words before releasing them into the world, and who were comfortable enough with themselves to let silence do some of the work. Here is a specific, practical challenge I want to give you to take into your next important conversation. Before you respond to anything significant, any question, any statement, any moment of tension, count silently to 3. Just 3 seconds. Notice what happens in those 3 seconds. Notice how the other person often continues talking, revealing something they would never have said if you'd filled the space too quickly. Notice how your own eventual response feels more considered, more intentional, more credible because of that brief pause. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is often its most powerful form. Here is a truth that linguists and psychologists and every experienced leader I have ever encountered will confirm from their own direct experience. In human communication, the actual content of your words is almost always less important than the way you deliver them. When people receive a message from another person, the literal words, the specific vocabulary, the logical argument, the information content, account for only a fraction of the total impact the message has on them. The tone of your voice, the pace at which you're speaking, the energy you're carrying in your body, these carry dramatically more weight than the words themselves. And the nonverbal layer, your posture, your eye contact, the micro-expressions crossing your face, whether your body is open or closed, communicates even beyond that. You can say, "I love you," in a way that makes someone feel genuinely cherished and seen, or in a way that makes them feel like a chore being checked off a list. You can deliver critical feedback in a way that genuinely motivates someone to grow, or in a way that quietly devastates their confidence and makes them afraid to try. You can say, "I need to talk to you about something," in a way that creates connection or in a way that fills the other person with dread. Same words, completely different outcomes, because the words are never the whole message. The practical implication of this principle is that you must become a serious, genuine student of your own delivery. Not just of what you say, but of how you sound when you say it, what energy you're bringing into the room, what your body is communicating independent of your words. Are you tense when you walk into difficult conversations? Are you rushing? Is there actual warmth in your voice, or has habit turned it cold and flat? Is your physical presence open and inviting, or subtly closed and defensive? And here is the question worth sitting with today, perhaps the most important reflection question in this entire conversation. When the people who know you best, the ones who are closest to you, think about the tone you usually carry, the emotional energy you typically bring into conversation, what one word would they honestly use to describe it? Warm, distracted, present, impatient, engaged, critical, rushed, safe. You do not have to guess at the answer. You can actually ask. And the answer you receive, if you ask with genuine openness, might be the most valuable piece of information anyone has given you in years. I want to pause now and talk about a single word. Just one word that, in my experience, destroys more conversations, more negotiations, and more moments of genuine connection than almost anything else in the English language. Are you ready for it? The word is but. Watch what actually happens in any conversation when you use it. I really appreciate how hard you've been working on this, but. The moment that but lands, something invisible but powerful happens. Everything that came before it begins to evaporate. The appreciation you just expressed disappears as if it was never said. The person hears only what follows the but. It operates like a verbal eraser. It retroactively cancels everything preceding it, leaving only the criticism or correction that follows. Now consider this alternative. I really appreciate how hard you've been working on this, and here's how I think we could make it even stronger. Same intent. Same information content. Completely different emotional reception. The word, and, connects and builds. The word, but, cancels and divides. One word. Enormous difference. This is a small, specific, immediately actionable change, and once you start noticing it, you will see it everywhere. In your own speech. In the speech of people around you. In every meeting, every difficult conversation, every performance review, every family discussion. And every single time you make the conscious choice to replace a but with an and, you will feel the energy in the conversation shift just slightly in a better direction. Small adjustments, practiced consistently, create enormous change over time. Great communicators understand at a deep level that language is never neutral. Every word carries an emotional charge. Every word either opens or closes. And you have far more conscious control over that charge, over whether your words open or close the people you're speaking with, than you've probably ever chosen to exercise. If I could give you one single communication habit, just one, that would meaningfully improve every area of your life simultaneously, your closest relationships, your effectiveness as a leader or parent, your understanding of yourself, your ability to navigate complexity, it would be this: learn to ask genuinely better questions. Most people, in most conversations, ask questions for one of two reasons: to confirm what they already believe, or to redirect the conversation back to their own experience. You know what that reminds me of? But great communicators ask questions for a fundamentally different reason. They ask to genuinely learn, to discover something they didn't know before, to understand another person's experience more completely. And that difference in intention, invisible to the outside observer, produces profoundly different conversations. There is a specific kind of question I have come to think of as the one level deeper question. Here is how it works. When someone shares something with you, an experience, a problem, a feeling, instead of responding immediately with your own related experience or your analysis or your advice, you ask one level deeper into theirs. What was that actually like for you? How long has that been going on? What do you think is really driving that? What would it mean for you if that changed? You stay in their world a little longer. You go one level deeper before you surface into your own. The effect of this habit is genuinely extraordinary. People feel profoundly understood, at a level they rarely experience, when someone takes real, sustained interest in the detail of their inner experience. It builds trust faster than almost anything else. It creates an emotional safety in conversations that allows people to be honest with you in ways they rarely are with others. And that honesty is the foundation of every relationship that actually matters. Here is something that many people in positions of authority, parents, managers, senior leaders, never fully reckon with. Influence is not given by a title. It is not granted by seniority. It is not even earned by being right. Influence is earned, slowly and consistently, through relationship. You cannot walk into any conversation and simply demand that your words carry weight. The demand itself undermines the very thing you're seeking. You have to earn that weight through consistent behavior over time, through being the person who shows up reliably when it matters, who follows through on even small commitments, who tells the truth even when a comfortable lie would be easier, who acknowledges their own mistakes clearly instead of deflecting or rationalizing. In family life, this truth is especially visible and especially important. Your children, as they grow into adults, will not follow your guidance simply because you are their parent. That authority diminishes naturally as they age. What replaces it, the only thing that can replace it, is trust. And that trust is built or eroded in 1,000 small daily moments. In whether you listen to them or talk at them. In whether you're genuinely present or merely physically nearby. In whether you admit when you're wrong or double down to protect your ego. In whether your interest in their lives feels real or transactional. Every interaction you have with another human being is either making a small deposit into or a small withdrawal from an invisible emotional account between you. Consistent deposits of honesty, genuine attention, respect, and follow-through build a reserve of trust so deep that your words, when you speak them, land with a weight and a credibility that no rhetorical technique could ever manufacture. And consistent withdrawals, small acts of dismissal, broken commitments, defensiveness, distraction, erode that account quietly but steadily. So the question is never, how do I get people to listen to me? The real question, the one worth living with, is, am I genuinely the kind of person worth listening to? Answer that honestly. Then go about becoming that person, one interaction at a time. The final principle I want to share with you is one that most people never think about. And yet, in my experience, it may be the single most powerful communication practice available to you right now, starting today. I call it the conversation after the conversation. Every significant interaction you have, a difficult discussion with someone you love, a high-stakes meeting at work, a moment of genuine conflict with a friend, any conversation that carries emotional weight, leaves a residue. In the hours and days that follow, there are things that were left unsaid, things that were misunderstood, emotions that were stirred up but never quite settled, moments where someone said something important and it didn't land the way they meant it, or where you said something that landed harder than you intended. Most people simply let that residue sit. They close the conversation, move on to the next thing, and never go back. And over time, that unresolved residue becomes sediment, layer upon layer of unfinished emotional business that accumulates quietly in the foundation of even the most important relationships, until one day those foundations begin to crack. The master communicator goes back. They follow up. They might say, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realized I didn't quite say what I meant. "Can I try again?" Or, "I wanted to make sure you knew how much I appreciated you sharing that with me." Or simply, "How are you feeling about where we landed? Is there anything still sitting with you?" This willingness to reopen and complete a conversation does something genuinely remarkable to a relationship over time. It signals that the other person is worth continued thought even when they're not in the room. That the exchange mattered enough to return to. That your commitment to understanding them is not just a performance that ends when the conversation ends, but something real and ongoing. And the reflection I'll close this principle with is this. Think right now of a conversation from the recent past that didn't end cleanly. One that is still sitting somewhere inside you, unresolved and uncomfortable. What would it actually take to go back and complete it? What is stopping you? And what might become possible in that relationship if you did? Let me pause here before we go any further and invite you to do something that most people never actually do. Not genuinely, not with real depth. I want to invite you to reflect. Think about the 3 most important relationships in your life right now. Not the easiest ones. Not the most comfortable or the least complicated. The most important ones, the ones whose quality determines the quality of your actual daily experience of being alive. In each of those relationships, how would you honestly describe the quality of your communication? Not the frequency, the quality. Are you truly heard in those relationships? Do you truly hear? Is there ease and openness in how you speak to each other? A sense that anything important can be said without fear of rejection or retaliation? Or is there something quieter and more troubling? Tension just beneath the surface, things that are thought but never spoken, feelings that are sensed by both people but acknowledged by neither. And here is the harder question beneath that question. If the other person in each of those relationships were sitting across from someone they trusted completely, someone with no connection to you, no stake in protecting your feelings, what would they say about how it feels to be in conversation with you? What words would they reach for? This is not an invitation to shame or self-criticism. It is an invitation to honest appraisal, the kind that is only possible when you stop being defensive for a moment and genuinely ask, what is actually true here? What has my pattern been, across years and decades? And what might become possible, what doors might open, what distance might close, if I began to change that pattern, starting now? Because here is what I know with absolute certainty. It is never too late to communicate differently. It is never too late to rebuild trust through changed and sustained behavior. It is never too late to say the things that should have been said years ago. It is never too late to begin asking the questions that should have been asked all along. Age is not a barrier to this. Experience, honestly examined, is actually the greatest possible foundation for it. When was the last time you truly evaluated the direction of your most important relationships? Not glanced at them from a distance and told yourself things were fine enough, but genuinely looked at them with clear eyes and asked, is this what I want? Is this what the other person deserves from me? And am I bringing the full measure of who I can be to the people who matter most? These are not comfortable questions. Comfortable questions don't change lives. These ones do. I want to speak directly to something now that I think is important to address honestly. Because if you are in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, this particular conversation carries a weight that is different from what it would carry for someone younger. And I think you deserve to hear it addressed directly rather than talked around. You have watched time pass. Not as an abstraction, but as a felt reality, the years that went by faster than you expected them to, the moments that slipped away before you fully registered them. And in the context of communication, you have likely made mistakes that you can trace directly to real consequences in your life. Not theoretical mistakes, real ones, with real costs. Maybe there is a marriage somewhere in your past, or present, where the communication slowly deteriorated over years, where 2 people who loved each other genuinely stopped being able to reach each other, and the distance that grew between them felt impossible to bridge. Maybe there is a relationship with a grown child that has a coolness or a formality in it that should not be there, and somewhere inside you, you know that some of what created that distance was the way you communicated, or failed to, during the years that mattered most. Maybe there is a career that plateaued at a level below what you knew you were capable of, not because you lacked intelligence or dedication, but because you never quite mastered the ability to inspire genuine loyalty, to communicate your vision in a way that moved people, to navigate the political landscape of human relationships with the skill it actually requires. I want to be honest with you, those histories are real. Those losses are real. To pretend otherwise would be dishonest, and this conversation is built on honesty. Glossing over real losses with cheerful reassurance serves no one. But here is what is equally, undeniably real. You are still here. Right now. Reading or listening to these words. And the years ahead of you, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, still hold possibility that is genuinely enormous if you choose to claim it. Think concretely about what it would mean to spend the next decade as a genuinely skilled, intentional, philosophically grounded communicator. Think about what your closest relationships would look and feel like day to day if you brought a new level of presence and genuine skill to every conversation. Think about the kind of example you would set for the younger people in your orbit, your children, your grandchildren, the younger colleagues who are watching how you move through the world as they try to figure out how to do life well. Communication is one of the very rare human skills that genuinely, demonstrably improves with age. If and only if you are paying attention. Because real wisdom is not simply accumulated information. It is perspective earned through experience. It is patience built through years of learning what actually matters and what does not. It is the hard-won capacity to see a situation from multiple angles simultaneously, to resist the first reactive impulse, to choose words that build something rather than words that wound something. You have something that younger people are only beginning to slowly develop. You have context. You have experience. Years of it. You have the capacity, earned through living, to recognize what is truly important and what is merely urgent noise. That is an extraordinary foundation. The question is simply whether you are willing to build consciously on it. Let me be direct with you now. Fully direct. Because this is the part of the conversation where I want you to feel something real rather than just understand something intellectual. Every relationship in your life is, at its most fundamental level, a conversation. Your marriage or partnership is a long, ongoing conversation that has been developing for years. The relationship you have with each of your children is a conversation, one that started the day they were born and will continue, in one form or another, for as long as either of you is alive. Your professional reputation, the way people in your field or your organization actually think about you, the degree to which they trust and follow you, is a conversation that has been happening whether you have been consciously participating in it or not. And the relationship you have with yourself, the way you talk to yourself in the quiet moments, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you are capable of, that is perhaps the most consequential conversation of all. And you, only you, are responsible for the quality of those conversations. Not the circumstances you were born into. Not the communication models you were or weren't given as a child. Not the difficult people in your life or the challenging situations you've navigated. You are an adult with agency. You have the capacity right now, today, to make a decision that will change the quality of every relationship that matters to you. That decision is not complicated. It is simply this: to take communication seriously. Not as one item among many on a list of self-improvement priorities, but as the central skill, the master skill, that underlies and determines the quality of everything else. To treat it with the seriousness and intentionality that it genuinely deserves. To invest in it not just by consuming information about it, but by actually, deliberately, consistently changing your behavior in real conversations, one exchange at a time. What would the next 30 days look like if you genuinely applied these 7 principles? If you asked yourself before every difficult conversation, what is this really about at its core? If you practiced the 3-second pause before responding to anything significant? If you replaced even half of your buts with ands? If you asked one genuinely curious follow-up question in every meaningful conversation rather than immediately returning to your own experience? If you identified 3 unfinished conversations in your life and actually went back to complete them? None of this is difficult in the way that learning a new technical skill is difficult. The difficulty here is a different kind. It is the difficulty of breaking habits that have been reinforced for decades, of overriding automatic responses that feel like simply who you are, of choosing a slightly more demanding path when the easier one is always right there. But here is the thing about habits. They break faster than you think when you apply consistent conscious pressure. And here is the thing about communication specifically. Even small, genuine, sustained changes in how you show up in conversation produce disproportionately large changes in how people experience being around you. The return on investment is among the highest available to any human being. And beyond the practical returns, beyond the stronger relationships and the improved professional effectiveness and the greater influence, there is something that matters even more. When you become a genuinely better communicator, you become a more fully present human being. You begin to actually experience your relationships rather than just moving through them. You go to sleep at night feeling connected to the people who matter most to you rather than vaguely disconnected and not quite sure why. You create, slowly and steadily, the lived experience of a life that is actually working, not just functionally, but deeply and meaningfully. That is not a small thing. That is, perhaps, everything. I want to close with what I believe is the deepest truth about human communication, the one that underlies every principle we've discussed, every story we've explored, every reflection we've sat with together today. At its core, communication is not about words. It was never about words. It is not about techniques or principles or any of the specific practices we've explored today, though all of them matter and all of them will serve you well if you actually use them. At its deepest, most essential level, communication is an act of courage. The courage to be honest when honesty is genuinely difficult, when the easier path is to say what someone wants to hear or to say nothing at all. The courage to be vulnerable when vulnerability feels dangerous, to let another person see something real in you rather than the polished, defended version you've learned to present. The courage to listen fully and openly, to truly hear another person, even when what they're saying challenges your self-image or contradicts what you want to be true. The courage to go back and complete what was left unfinished, even when time has passed and it would be easier to simply let it go. The courage to say, "I love you," in a way that actually lands and actually reaches the other person. The courage to say, "I was wrong," before circumstances force you to. The courage to ask the question whose answer you're afraid of. That courage is available to you. It always has been. It did not expire at some earlier age or get used up by your history. Every conversation, every single one, starting with the very next one you have, is another opportunity to practice it. You have lived long enough to know, with the kind of certainty that only experience can provide, that time does not wait for anyone. The relationships you want to deepen are waiting for your attention right now. The words you have been holding back, the important ones, the honest ones, the tender ones, need to be spoken now. The listening you have been too distracted or too defended to genuinely offer needs to begin now. Not when things settle down into a more convenient season. Not when the timing feels better. Not when you feel fully ready, because full readiness is a myth that will keep you waiting forever. With this conversation. With this person. Today. Because the people in your life, the ones who matter to you most deeply, the ones whose presence in your life is genuinely irreplaceable, they are not waiting for you to become a perfect communicator. They are not holding out for some future version of you who has everything figured out. They are waiting, much more simply and much more profoundly, for you to care enough to try. For you to show up in conversation with your full self rather than a defended fraction of it. For you to be present, genuinely and courageously present, in the moments that matter. Start today. Not next week. Not after you've thought about it more. Today. One conversation. One genuine question. One real pause before responding. One honest word you've been holding back. One unfinished conversation you return to and complete. That is how it begins. Not with a dramatic transformation, but with a single moment of genuine intention followed by consistent action. And that beginning, taken seriously, practiced with patience, repeated with real intention across days and weeks and years, is how everything changes. How relationships deepen. How trust rebuilds. How influence grows. How you become, in the truest sense, the communicator and the human being that the most important people in your life have always deserved. Thank you for being here. Now go have the conversation that matters most. There is a silent, invisible form of authority that does not require a stage, a title, or a voice that demands to be heard above the rest of the world. It is a concept I call the supremacy of present silence. We live in a frantic culture of the quick reply, where we are taught that our value is tied to the speed of our wit or the volume of our rebuttal, yet the man or woman who can hold a silence without flinching is the one who truly owns the room. I want you to consider the immense psychological strength you project when, in the face of a direct critique, an unfair accusation, or a chaotic emotional outburst, you choose, consciously, not to defend yourself immediately. Instead of rushing to fill the air with justifications, you allow the silence to breathe for 5, 10, even 15 seconds while maintaining a calm, attentive gaze. That space is not a vacuum. It is a laboratory of respect. It is a profound, non-verbal message that tells the other person, what you have just said is so significant, or perhaps so deeply felt, that it deserves to be honored with thought before it is met with words. Most people are terrified of the silence because it acts as a mirror, forcing them to sit with their own discomfort and their own internal noise. But as a master of this craft, you must embrace the pause as your most loyal ally. It is in the pause that the ego's fires die down and the possibility of genuine, soul-level understanding is born. If you want your spoken words to eventually carry the density of gold, you must stop handing them out like cheap paper currency that is being printed around the clock. Learn to make your words scarce. Weigh them with the gravity they deserve. By allowing silence to do the heavy lifting of reflection, you transform from someone who just talks into someone whose voice is truly awaited. We have spent hours discussing how to stop your words from eroding your life, but we must now address their divine capacity to build a cathedral within the hearts of those you love. Most of us, especially as we age, become tragically stingy with our recognition. We guard our praise as if it were a depleting natural resource that will run dry if we are too generous with it. But genuine high-level praise is not a mere transaction. It is a spiritual investment in the very identity of the human being standing before you. A common communicator offers lazy praise, phrases like, good job, nice work, or you look great. While kind, these are hollow echoes that barely touch the surface of a person's soul. A philosopher communicator utilizes the precision mirror. You do not simply praise the final result. You reach deeper to validate the character and the effort that made the result possible. You don't just say, thanks for being a good partner. You say, I've watched the way you've handled the stress of this month with such grace and patience, and seeing your resilience makes me feel safe and incredibly proud to be by your side. When you are that specific, the other person doesn't just feel complimented. They feel seen, understood, and fundamentally valued in a world that often ignores them. Your ability to articulate the hidden virtues that others do not yet dare to acknowledge in themselves is the greatest gift you can bestow upon your family and your peers. Do not let the sun go down tonight without having built a bridge of validation to someone who matters. It is the single most effective way to make a massive deposit into the emotional bank account of your relationships, and the compound interest of that kindness will sustain you through the hardest winters of your life. As you move through your 40s, 50s, and 60s, a sobering truth begins to emerge. You are no longer just talking to the people in your living room or your office. You are drafting, one sentence at a time, the ultimate script of how you will be spoken of when you are no longer there to speak for yourself. Your children, your grandchildren, and your colleagues will not sit in a circle years from now and recount your stock portfolio or the titles on your business card with tears in their eyes. What will echo in their minds, what will define the story of you, is the way you made them feel during the mundane, quiet moments of a random Tuesday afternoon. They will remember if you were the person who always had a sharp judgment ready to fire, or if you were the one who offered an open ear that felt like a sanctuary for their pain. They will remember if your presence felt like a warm light or a cold shadow. Every single interaction you have today is a brushstroke on the final, permanent portrait of your legacy. Therefore, before the next word leaves your mouth, I want you to ask yourself, is this the tone? Is this the impatience? Is this the sarcasm that I want to resonate in their memories when my voice is nothing but an echo in their hearts? We aren't just exchanging data. We are building the emotional infrastructure that our loved ones will inhabit long after we are gone. All the wisdom you have gathered through decades of struggle and triumph is worthless if you deliver it with an ego so heavy that it crushes the very person you are trying to help. Let us have the courage to look into the dark corners of our own habits. We must speak about what most people prefer to bury, the shadow that exists in all our communication. It is that reactive, reflexive impulse to be cynical to protect our own vulnerability, to use a "but" to invalidate someone else's reality, or to punish those we love with a cold, manipulative silence. Identifying your unique pattern of conversational sabotage is the first real step toward becoming a truly master-level human being. Some of us use humor as a shield to avoid real intimacy. Others use cold, hard logic as a sword to decapitate the emotions of a partner who just needs to be held. When you feel that old, automatic reaction, the one that has been reinforced by 30 years of habit, rising up in your chest, I want you to stop. That is your moment of absolute truth. That is the thin line where you decide whether you are a slave to your history or an architect of your future. You do not have to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. Real maturity is not the absence of these dark impulses. It is the hard-won capacity to witness the impulse and choose a response that honors the relationship instead. The next time you feel the desperate, ego-driven need to win an argument, ask yourself the most important question of all: do I want to be right, or do I want to be connected? In the highest stakes of life, you can rarely have both. The wise communicator understands that losing an argument is often the only way to win the soul of the person standing across from them. Mastery in this art is not a destination where you arrive, park the car, and walk away satisfied. It is a garden that requires humble, consistent, and daily tending. I do not want you to leave this conversation expecting to be a perfect communicator by sunrise. Perfection is a paralyzing myth that prevents the good from ever happening. Instead, I want you to seek a 1% shift. Just 1% more awareness in your very next conversation. Try to listen just a few seconds longer than you want to. Try to ask one question born of genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Try to pause just long enough for the other person to feel safe. As you begin to refine this art, you will notice a miraculous transformation. The world around you will seem to become a softer, more understanding place. But the secret is that the world hasn't changed at all. You have changed the frequency at which you broadcast your soul to the universe. You have lived long enough to know that anything worth having requires a sacrifice of effort. Connecting soul to soul with another human being is the most difficult work you will ever do, but it is the only work that truly pays in the currency of peace. You possess the experience of your years, you have these 7 principles, and now you have a philosophy of intention. Go now and use your words to heal the wounds you didn't cause, to inspire the hope that has been lost, and to love with a courage that asks for nothing in return. Time is the only resource we cannot replenish, yet your capacity to change a life through one honest, intentional conversation is, quite simply, infinite. There is a specific kind of bravery required for the conversations we spent years, perhaps decades, avoiding because they felt too heavy, too dangerous, or too disruptive to the status quo. We often mistake politeness for kindness, but the master communicator knows that withholding a necessary truth is actually a form of selfishness. It is protecting your own comfort at the expense of the other person's growth. I want you to consider the alchemy of truth, the process of taking a hard, cold fact and delivering it with such warmth and such high intention that it transforms from a weapon into a tool for reconstruction. When you must say something difficult, you do not lead with the "but" that cancels out their worth. You lead with the "and" that acknowledges their humanity while addressing the issue at hand. You lean into the principle of delivery, ensuring your tone carries the weight of a helping hand rather than the edge of a gavel. Think of the relief that comes when someone finally says the thing everyone has been thinking, but says it with such genuine grace that the tension in the room finally evaporates. You have reached an age where you no longer have the luxury of wasting time on surface-level pleasantries that lead nowhere. Use your context, your earned patience, and your hard-won perspective to become the person who can speak the unspoken truths in a way that actually builds a bridge instead of burning one. The most respected leaders and parents are not those who never say anything upsetting, but those who are trusted to tell the truth even when it is uncomfortable. By mastering this alchemy, you prove that your commitment to the relationship is stronger than your fear of the conflict. We have spent this entire journey focused on the words that pass between you and the outside world, but we must conclude by addressing the most consequential conversation of all, the one you are having with yourself in the dark. Your internal dialogue is the invisible thermostat that sets the temperature for every other interaction in your life. If you are cruel to yourself in your thoughts, you will eventually leak that bitterness into your speech with others. Many of us carry legacy scripts. Old, dusty phrases told to us by parents or teachers decades ago that we still repeat to ourselves as if they were absolute laws of nature. I'm asking you to apply Principle 5 to your own soul. Ask yourself better questions. Instead of asking, "Why can't I ever get this right?" which only invites your brain to list your failures, ask, "What does the person I am becoming need to do in this next hour?" You are the steward of your own mind, and you have the agency right now to fire the internal critic who has been sabotaging your peace for 40 years. Remember that you cannot give what you do not have. You cannot offer genuine, safe, and open listening to a child or a spouse if you are constantly shouting yourself down internally. This is the master skill in its purest form, choosing words of grace, patience, and high intention when you are the only one listening. As you refine this inner speech, you will find that your outer speech gains a natural, effortless credibility that no technique could ever simulate. You are still here, you are still breathing, and you are still capable of rewriting the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you are worth. Master the conversation within, and you will find that the world outside begins to reflect that same order, that same clarity, and that same profound peace.